There we go, so it's recording, so everything you say from now on in can be held against you.
What were you saying about Lionel earlier?
Yeah. So, right then, so work-life balance. Now, so this is highly technical with a Bluetooth kind of wire thing here, but fortunately my brand new laptop doesn't have Bluetooth.
You're not in the screen.
Oh, am I not in the screen? Oh, okay, well, that's not too important.
There we go.
Can I be heard? That's
Yeah.
the most important thing.
I don't know.
So work-life balance. Right, so let's take a start by looking at some Capgemini financial results and the impact on projects. So first of all, so this is taken in H1 this year. So profit increase 31%, that's great. But if we're going to keep the shareholders happy, then that needs to be more. We need to have more of that. I'm not sure what that means, spinning away. Net cash 272 million euros, but if we're going to keep the analysts happy, that needs to be more. Charge out rates, that's always being squeezed. So we all need to show more value, and that needs to be more. RVE, the assignment rate, vacation excluded, typically around about 80%, and people are always on the bench, but if we're going to be a viable business, that needs to be more. Operating margin 7.3%, but if we're going to compete with Accenture, that needs to be more. All of these things: bookings, revenues, operating profit, those numbers. But if we're going to be a tier one provider, then that all needs to be more. Direct Line Group, our most valuable program, £100 million worth of program there. But if we're going to grow, then we need more of those. We need those values to be more. So hours worked per employee per week, typically around about 45 to 50 hours a week, stretching often higher. But if we're going to meet all those things, then that needs to be less. So my proposition to you is that in order to be more productive and achieve all those things, we actually need to be working less. So let's look at some figures to back that up. So this is from this isn't me making this up. This is from the Office for National Statistics, and what we're looking at here. I think that thing's still doing that, isn't it? Never mind. So this is what this is looking at is the average hours per worker on the left-hand side across the G7 countries, including ourselves, and showing that compared to the GDP per hour worked per employee. So in other words, we're looking at the effort put in per country, and we're looking at the results that effort's achieved. So first of all, we can see that the G7, excluding the UK, is already more productive combined, everybody else compared to us. But let's look at the individual countries and see how that pans out. So Germany. Now what we're looking at here is this line at 100, this index mark of 100 is showing where the UK is. So in each of these, for each of these countries, we're seeing where each country is either higher or lower than the UK. So this is the UK at this point here. So we're saying that Germany, the amount of hours that they work, the average hours per worker, is this much less than what we work. We work to this level. Germans work much less. They work far fewer hours per week than we work. And what's the impact on their productivity? So there's Germany right up there. They work this much less than us. They achieve this much more than us. So what about the French with their 35-hour weeks and their 2-month holidays, etc.? They work a bit harder than Germany, but they still work less than us. So what's their GDP per employee per hour worked? So it's pretty good. So they work less than us, and they achieve actually almost as much as the Germans. So Canada, well, they worked a bit harder than us. So where do we think Canada ended up? Canada produced less. So this is the Office for National Statistics. Now Japan, so they worked the hardest of the lot so far. So how did they do? They achieved the worst of the lot so far, right down there, didn't achieve much at all. And this is before the 2011 tsunami as well. These figures are pretty much the latest that are available. I think 2011 is available as well, but nevertheless. So Italy, so you can see there, and I think you've noticed that you've got the grey and the blue, 2009 versus 2010. So In 2010, the Italians decided to step up to the mark and work harder than they did in 2009. And what happens? They achieved less in 2010 than they did in 2009. In fact, you can see that trend across all of the comparisons pretty much between the years there. As each country worked harder, they pretty much produced less. Now, what about the Americans? So they worked the hardest of all. And how did that get on for them? Well, actually, they produced the most of all. So the Americans kind of bucked the trend there. They put in the most effort, and that actually paid off for them. And incidentally, what about the Greeks? So where did Greece come in terms of how hard they worked?
The least.
So they were the least hardworking.
I imagine so.
The Greeks were the most hardworking.
So
check out.
It's just that they're all under 50.
Yeah.
It's just that you're right.
Yeah.
So check out this link later on, and you can see a BBC article about the Greeks and about this whole subject. And of course, the Greeks worked the hardest, and their reward was economic collapse. Is kind of what I'm saying. So so let's take a look at USA versus Germany then. Why is it that they stand out in terms of their effort versus productivity? So we can see with those two that the Americans work hard and they get a lot of payback for that. The Germans get equal payback, but actually they don't work very hard at all. So I think there's a bit of a sort of cultural explanation for that, and these are just two examples of the sort of things that might help to explain this. It's by no means scientific, but you can check out these later on if you're interested. But for the USA, so this article, work-life balance, it's all the same for the Americans. They don't distinguish between work and life. It's to them, they've got a day and they go and do stuff. And I've been in the States before, and that pretty much matches up to what I've seen in the Americans. There's not this idea of you go to work and then you go home and you do life. It's they might do something in the middle of the day if they need to for other stuff. They might hold a meeting on a Sunday with a work colleague. They might have meetings at home between each other. In fact, that's exactly what this article is talking about. So the time available. So just think of that phrase, time available, that Americans allocate to work is pretty much the whole day. So they don't actually work the whole day. They're not always being productive throughout the whole day, but the time available is pretty much indefinite in a lot of cases. Not everyone, but that's pretty much the culture for a lot of them. Don't know if anybody can back that up who's worked in the States. But the Germans, now this piece here from Justin Rolat, who's someone who does a lot of reports on BBC Newsnight. So
I saw that programme.
So you saw that programme.
Good.
So in that programme, it's quite an interesting insight, isn't there, into the behaviour of the Germans. I mean, their attitude to work is very dedicated. When you're at work, and you're not messing around. You're not talking about what you saw on TV last night. You're not disappearing off to do other things, and you're certainly not organising meetings with your co-workers at 7:30 at night in their home, unlike the Americans. And in fact, in that programme, one of the things that one of the ladies said from Germany who had worked in the UK was just how surprised she was at, in the UK, how people are doing just that, chatting away, talking about TV and things. Whereas in Germany, they're getting on with the job. So the time available to work across these two countries is very different. The Americans work very hard, but they're actually not working throughout the entire time. They're spreading the work around, but they're treating time available as a pretty loose and open-ended thing. The Germans are treating time available as a very strict thing, and they're making sure that time available is focused on work, and they're efficient in that time. So that might start to explain why there's that difference between the two. The Americans are working really hard. Actually, they're not working, that's just the hours they're doing. They're not necessarily working, being productive during that time, that's just their attitude to the time available to work. And that's the opposite for the Germans, but they're both achieving the same thing. So if you go onto the internet and you sort of search for a comparison between productivity and effort, you get graphs that look a lot like this. And there's dozens of these sort of graphs, and they all have this sort of pattern. And what this is saying is that there's a diminishing return between extended hours of working. So when a project really needs to kick off and do something, quite often everyone's got to work 80-hour weeks or whatever it is. Now that works initially. There's a productivity gain there initially. But very soon that tails off to the point where productivity is pretty much the same as a standard working week, to the point where if those extended hours continue, the productivity actually drops off to lower than a standard working week. So this example here of these factory workers, and this is productivity measured by money or profit, and this is showing that when they started a period of overtime, that productivity started to go up, and as that extended working time continued, so the productivity dropped down to the point where they actually started losing money by assuming that they could just work all these long extended hours. And the same thing here with game developers. So this is up from 2005. This is their standard working week. Here they had to go into a period of intense overtime, and that boosted productivity in week 2. Week 3 still productive, but less so. By week 4 it's kind of beginning to match, and week 5 it's beginning to match and even drop below their standard working productivity there. So the consensus is that doing this over a long period of time is not necessarily productive. Now, there's something called Parkinson's law, and this chap made a statement in 1955, and you have to forgive it's slightly sort of sexist, but it was 1955, so he always not that sexist. But he just talks about a woman, at home with a lot of time, and he just says a lady at home with a day to write a letter, will take an hour to find the stationery set, and then another hour and a half to forget it's a lady, it's
a person.
An hour and a half to write the letter, and then perhaps go and get some lunch, and then go and find a stamp, and then do some other procrastinating, and eventually get around to going to post it, and at 5 o'clock the task can be done. That person had a day. That man had a day to is that what I mean? Had a day to do that task, and effectively what happened was that the work expanded so as to fill the time available for its completion. So that work could have been done in an hour. If the time available was an hour, then the same task would have been done. But because a day was available, then the task took a day. So that's Parkinson's law. It's saying that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. And that's work expands, not productivity. So productivity doesn't expand to fill the time available, work expands to fill the time available. And that's time available, not time required. Work doesn't expand so as to fill the time required for the task. Work expands so as to fill the time available for the task. And you can see the full Parkinson's law sort of statement that was made at that link there. And it's not meant to be a deadly serious thing. It's not like a sort of a mathematical law or something. But it's just a bit of a kind of a playful, light-hearted sort of observation, if you like. But I think a lot of people accept it as being quite true. So there's this thing called the slow movement. And now this kicked off back in the 80s from the idea of the fact that McDonald's had put a fast food place into Rome. And a lot of people kicked back at that and said, we don't want fast food in Rome, we want slow food. And by slow food they're talking about locally sourced food, and food that's been cooked locally and cooked properly and taking time over it, and then eaten in a way that people talk to each other and take their time over it. It's a rebellion against fast food, slow food. So from that, this whole slow movement evolved, and there's a whole load of things you can check out on the internet which are regarded as part of the slow movement. A whole load of things. Slow sport and slow slow property. There's a whole load of slow things. And so here's a sort of a mixture, not particularly in any great order, of some of the things that are said, but as I say, it started from the slow food movement. And this is chap Carl Honore, who's written a whole load of slow books in the context of work. And he talks about a whole load of issues around how to apply this sort of principle of slow to the work environment. As I say, a lot of the slow movement stuff isn't really directly relevant to us in work, but this chap is kind of like the slow work person to look at, So it's sort of recognising that working life is very different to what it was 20 years ago. The amount of time available to work, has changed. It used to be pretty much set. You turn up to work, then you do work, And then when you went home, you wouldn't do work anymore because you couldn't. There was nothing else to do. Maybe you take a report in your case or something, but pretty much that's where work stopped. Whereas now, the time available is this huge, great big long thing that's effectively 24 hours long. Say nothing of the place available to work. You know, we've got VPN connections, we've got devices. You know, we can check work whenever we want. So the tech boom, if you like, and the fact that the culture we live in now is that there are two people in a family or in any kind of partnership situation. You know, there are two parties now working full time, so always too busy. There's no one there in slow time doing all the slow time tasks. Both partners are there working, you know, in fast time, if you like, and therefore we're always too busy. And too busy means that we're likely to be, or less likely to be, prioritising. So we're not going to be as focused. We're not going to be working as optimally effective as if we had a bit more time to slow down and think about what we're actually trying to achieve, rather than sort of treating every task as a tactical response to whatever comes next. So we're seeing a diminishing return to this whole working harder and faster thing, as we saw from some of those charts earlier as well. So we need to find ways to better achieve a work-life balance by identifying a working culture and patterns that allow us to best operate in the always-on world. That's what we're living in now, isn't it? It's always on. You know, we can always access all this technology. I think a lot of us have just sort of found ourselves drifting into this always-on world, and no one's really said, well, hang on a second, this is how we used to work when we couldn't access information all the time, and now sort of year by year by year, almost like month by month, changes taking place that has suddenly put us into this position in a sort of an insidious way, and now we're saying, hang on a second, when did this happen? We've suddenly got work available all of the time. So we need to find ways of dealing with that. So, you know, digital detox is a phrase people are using. You know, turn off the technology, recognise when to reduce that time available to work, because you're probably not being more productive anyway. You're just saying, I'm available all the time, and the productivity is not there. You know, the extra time available is there, the extra effort is there, but the extra productivity is not there, as we've seen in the previous slides. So we don't need to reply to every email the minute it arrives. And one thing I liked that I heard stated was, you know, this isn't a direct quote, this is kind of a paraphrasing, but you know, our sense of urgency to do everything now is sometimes an overactive or misplaced sense of responsibility, which is not actually addressing a pressing need. So an email arrives, got to respond. Actually, there was no need to respond to that email then, especially when it arrived at 8:30 at night, or very priced email. I could have waited till the next day, could have probably waited till the next week in many cases. So it's all about prioritisation and deciding what needs to be done now in fast time and what needs to be done later in sort of slow time, if you like. So, you know, a couple of things also just being mentioned at random really. So build more time between tasks so that everything isn't a big rush. So if you've got a 5-minute walk between buildings, you know, plan 10 minutes through, so you get there slightly early, you're not rushed. Don't plan 4 minutes through, so you're running between the buildings. You know, you need to plan these gaps. These are just things I'm reporting about that have been said. So, you know, accept realistic deadlines and set realistic deadlines. Connect with the inner tortoise is what these people are saying. Build slow activities into each day. Yeah, ironing, you know, because when you're doing those things... Well, absolutely, because it's downtime, it's slow time. You know, it's time to think and assimilate what you've been doing during the day. And you can do that subconsciously. You know? If you're always on, always doing stuff fast, then you don't have time to assimilate and consider actually what's my agenda for tomorrow. And as I say, in slow time, you're kind of doing that subconsciously anyway, so you don't really even need to think about it. So there's benefits in just going into slow time, just to recognise that you're not in that gap of the time available being so broad. So take physical break, talk to other people. You know, you've got an email exchange that takes place with the person sitting next to you. Don't bounce 7 emails. You know, take a 2-minute conversation. So delegate more. You see, Nikki, you know, got you guys running these meetings, so she can focus on those. You know?
Focus on the ironing.
Focus on the ironing. Absolutely. So 80-20 rule. Let go of the things that aren't critical, or certainly not that aren't critical now, and don't take the office with you all the time. So these are sort of things that the slow movement is talking about, you know, and that's what I mean by slow. Slow is not about being unprofessional. It's not about working literally slowly. It's not about working 9 to 5. You know, it's about a more metaphorical sense of slow. You know, just sort of accepting this sort of downtime, accepting this not being in the always-on world. You know. So, so this is the key thing. Be disciplined about the time available, otherwise you're going to fill it. And you're not really going to achieve much more, which is what Parkinson's law is saying. So, in summary, working more doesn't always lead to proportionally producing more, and is sometimes counterproductive and often at best inefficient. It's beneficial for a couple of weeks maybe to get over that urgent project requirement, but if this is the culture of working all this time, then it's not productive. And this is what the Americans demonstrate. They work all of these hours, but they're only as productive as the Germans who work all of these hours down here. So the G7 countries demonstrate a counterintuitive relationship between effort and productivity, but these have been my views as to why this isn't necessarily accepted wisdom, but this has been my views of, it may not be 100% scientific, that interpretation of the ONS figures, but nevertheless I think it does demonstrate certain cultural behaviours that offer some explanations that at least are useful to get us thinking about these sorts of things. So cultural attitudes and time available for one explanation. So technology has created the means to access work 24/7. So how do we turn this to our advantage rather than disadvantage? That's something for people to think about. There's not necessarily one fast answer to that, but it's about just recognising that's a problem and then sort of dealing with it in a way that makes more sense to our individual lives. So in the always-on world, take control of when to be on. Don't be on all the time. Time available right here. Be productive, but consider slow approaches to productivity to achieve greater efficiency. Slow is not about being any less professional than we all are. It's about being, if anything, more professional and finding ways to be more efficient. So, almost the most important thing of all, be disciplined about time available. Parkinson's law. Okay. So that was it. A couple of other things which I've not read. So there's a book here, The Winter of Our Disconnect. How one family basically didn't do anything for a whole winter and didn't have any iPads or didn't do any tweeting or have any kind of online activity at all, and just did things like talking to each other and living like people lived sort of 3 years ago or something. What,
3 years.
Yeah. So things haven't changed that quickly. It's they gave that a go. The thing that Jude's been talking about, which I haven't read, but I think it's very much linked to the subject, is the 25-hour working week and other radical ideas for better employee productivity. And also Capgemini is meant to be releasing, unless I've missed it and other people have seen it, some work-life balance principles. So I think Frances Duffy is supposed to be releasing those at some time in the near future. So it'll be interesting to see what she has to say about that, and indeed if there's any view on time available being any kind of explanation to achieving a better work-life balance. So that's it.
Well done.
I like your disclaimer when they which you haven't read.
Can I ask a question?
Oh yeah.
So,
Let's keep it on while we do the question.
when you were doing the analysis of the statistical data,
Yeah.
so you had less GDP per hour worked
Yeah.
in a country.
Only Evan Davis is allowed to question my my method.
Well,
So,
did you get figures as to just the actual GDP per worker? Because otherwise,
So I didn't gather. I mean, those figures are taken from a booklet from the
okay.
Office for National Statistics. So I don't know exactly how they gathered those figures or.
No, but were there statistics which said sort of the GDP per worker? Because the per hour worked, if a country works more hours, you'd expect the average to probably be a little bit lower because there are more hours to be divided by, for example.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you might think the GDP would be. It might show that the country is less productive the more hours they work, but it doesn't necessarily show that they are less productive in general. They might produce more GDP per worker through working longer hours, for example.
And you're trying to shatter it on
If
certain methodologies.
That might be a
little bit cruel.
What I can do is point you to where you can find these figures, and it's part of a. Yeah, we can edit this bit out. I can point you to the website where these figures are, and there's a PDF document you can download, and I think it does go into a bit more detail than I've necessarily provided, and maybe my data is slightly skewed towards my argument than the rest of the document might be. But no, it's if you're interested, I can show you a link to that.
Definitely.
I'm going to do some SRG style.
But thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
I was hoping it would stop.
Don't want to buy you a beer later.
Yeah.
Do I see a
more
question
questions,
2,
or-
3 and 4?
Let's have a word.
There are points rather than questions for me, not for anyone else. Listen,
What is the weighted index of the
Is it-
average of the world? Is the-
It's his private journal and notes, Jessica.
the three were actually, top three, 1, 2, 3 were actually what I just said, just in different ways.
Right.
And then another one was, it's an interesting question in my mind, whether work-life balance is meant to mean that you spend sort of equal amount of times on either, or that it's totally separate, or rather that actually it's one and the same thing. So you said that it's deterioration of work-life balance, but it might be actually an improvement of work-life balance if there isn't actually a separation between the two. So for example, if there isn't a separation between the two, you might then go and have lunch with a friend in the middle of the working day under the assumption that at night time, when no one else is actually wanting to see you, you can do work. So for example, there might be an improvement of work-life balance.
Yeah.
So you mean kind of switch more to the American style?
That's interesting.
Yeah, that
Well,
might be
I
an
think- I think
improvement.
all of
Because we're
these
currently
ideas
just bad
are about-
Germans.
It's all about achieving what you need to achieve, because people get stressed individually for different reasons, and this is all about saying, right, well, how do you best deal with the work load that you have for the life that you want to lead, you know? So in America, they're quite happy, a lot of them, to do pretty much what you're saying, which is to say, you know, we don't have to work between 9 and 5 or 9 and 6 or whatever, we can pretty much work when we want, and we'll fit in all sorts of things in between, and we'll achieve what we want to achieve with life and work pretty much being one big thing, you know. It's and absolutely, you know, if that's what you want to do, then you know, that's the benefit of deciding to do that, isn't it? It's, but for a lot of people, you know, maybe regardless of what they like to do, they've got other priorities or whatever, and they actually have to find ways to, you know, to find these divisions between the two. Yeah.
So does anyone know what the different holiday allowances are in the different countries? Because you hear a lot about the Americans having 2 weeks holiday.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean,
then
God, apart from anything else, they work.
What's the French? I mean, clearly because the whole of France shuts down in August, but they must have other holiday too. So I wonder how many weeks holiday they get a year.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It might be more.
The Nordic countries get loads as well because they have basically a month where they shut
Can't
down.
see.
they have
Can't
a summer, like they have a summer month where pretty much everyone is, but then they also get additional allowance on top of that. Where they loads of time.
Justin?
So when I worked in Japan, people in their contracts had 20 days holiday, but they didn't take any of them because it was considered basically rude or bad form to try and go on holiday when you should actually be working. But on the flip side, they have 18 national holidays in a year. We only have 8. So I guess there's also the cultural.
Do they take time as a holiday to go away?
Any more than a week is like just
Bad form.
Unfrowned upon.
unheard of. Which is why when you used to see Japanese tourists, they were all really old because that was when they retired and had the time to actually go somewhere.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see GDP versus like retirement age, for example.
And the other interesting thing is that you could almost say half of their population don't work as well because they say to women, basically once you are pregnant and have a baby, you are not allowed to work anymore. And their GDP is predicated on having the salary man working 20 hours a day and only him pulling in a salary. But it's quite messed up there.
So I think work-life balance is all about culture. You know, in different countries' culture. I think that is the root of the explanation to what each individual experiences in these different countries. You know, it's all about a collective culture, I think.
When I was at Burberry, some of the directors ended up going over to San Francisco for some Salesforce conferences, but also spent time going to Facebook and to Google and looked at how they worked.
Right.
And like, you know, there's things like they do a laundry service and stuff, so you can kind of do that in the daytime and sort that out. And then there's games rooms and breakout areas where you can just go and sleep on a beanbag somewhere if you're tired in the afternoon and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
They have masseuse in the office as well. You can get your massage daily.
The Google masseuse who made like millions because he had shares in Google when they started. So when they did their they released their stock, the Google masseuse became a multimillionaire.
Yeah, then there's
experience.
the opposite way. Where my girlfriend works, for example, they have everything in the office so that you never have to leave. So they have a cafeteria, a weighted restaurant, a dry cleaning service, a dentist, a doctor, a masseuse, flats, beds,